The sun had barely started its slow descent when Amaka stepped out of the thick bushes, her raffia basket pressed tightly against her hip. She had walked almost 2 hours into the heart of Umunze forest, searching for bitter leaf and lemongrass for her mother's cough. The path was familiar, narrow and beaten by years of hunters and herbal seekers, but something in the air felt off. A strange stillness, as if even the wind was holding its breath. She adjusted her wrapper and quickened her pace, her sandals slapping softly against the dry earth. Her thoughts wandered to her siblings, little Obinna, who was always hungry, and Adaze, who had started coughing last night. Mama's medicine had run out. There was no money to buy another bottle. Amaka didn't blame God anymore. She had stopped asking questions at 19, the year her father died, and left them with nothing but unpaid debts and whispers from neighbours who thought poverty was contagious. A sudden sound snapped her out of her thoughts. It wasn't a bird call or a monkey's cry. It was a groan. Low. Human. She froze, heart thudding in her chest. Every instinct told her to run. This was the forest. Strange things happened in places like this, stories of madmen, spirits, or worse. But the groan came again, followed by a faint rustle of leaves. Slowly, carefully, she crept toward the sound, each step heavier than the last. And then she saw him. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, and slumped beneath a palm tree like a broken puppet. His shirt was torn, stained with blood and dirt. One of his shoes was missing. His face was bruised, a deep gash running across his temple. But the strangest thing was the gold wristwatch clinging stubbornly to his wrist, out of place in this wilderness. Amaka's breath caught. Her first instinct was to run back. She didn't know this man. He could be dangerous. What if he was pretending? What if it was a trap? But then he moved. Barely. Just a twitch. His lips parted and a word slipped out, fragile and cracked like old wood. Help! Something in her chest pulled tight. She should walk away. She had no business getting involved. But as she looked at the bruises on his face and the blood on his shirt, she thought of her father, how he had collapsed on their farm and no one helped until it was too late. She looked around. No one, no noise, just her, just him. Amaka took a step closer, heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Are you alive?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. He didn't answer. She dropped her basket and knelt beside him, careful not to touch him just yet. He was breathing, shallow but steady. His skin was hot to the touch and his pulse fluttered like a trapped bird. She didn't know how, but she had to move him. She couldn't carry him all the way back to the village, but maybe. Maybe if she could get him to the narrow path by the stream, someone might pass by. Still, she hesitated. What if the villagers found out she brought a strange man to her house? What if her mother panicked? But what was the alternative? Leave him here to die? Her eyes settled on his wristwatch again. Gold. Expensive. His fingers, though bloodied, looked soft, not the hands of a farmer or labourer. Who was he? She shook her head. No time for questions. Not now. With trembling hands, Amaka slipped her arms beneath his and dragged him gently, inch by painful inch, toward the path. Her wrapper tore at the bottom. Sweat poured down her neck. Every few steps she paused to breathe. But she didn't stop. Because for reasons she didn't yet understand, something in her spirit told her this man wasn't just anybody, and whatever storm had brought him here wasn't finished. The small mud house groaned as Amaka pushed the door open with her back, half carrying, half dragging the unconscious man inside. Her arms ached, her wrapper was torn and her heart pounded like a drum inside her chest. But somehow, she got him into the back room, the tiny space behind their kitchen where they stored yams, firewood, and sometimes hid from rainstorms. Now it would hide something much more dangerous. She laid him gently on the raffia mat, breath shallow. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at his face. The cut on his temple had dried into a dark crust, and his once white shirt clung to him in pieces, His skin, though bruised, still looked untouched by sun. His beard, though grown, was neatly shaped. This wasn't a village man. Whoever he was, he didn't belong here. "Amaka," her mother's voice called from the main room. "You've been gone for hours." Amaka froze. Her legs refused to move. She hadn't thought this through. What would she say? What if her mother panicked? But she couldn't lie to her. She stepped out of the room, brushing dust off her palms. "Mama, please come. I need you to see something." Mama Ejima sat hunched on a wooden stool, her wrapper loosely tied over her chest, sweat lining her brow. Her cough had worsened. When she stood and followed Amaka into the back room, she stopped short at the door, eyes wide. "Who is this?" "I don't know," Amaka whispered, her voice tight. "I found him in the forest, bleeding, barely breathing." Mama Ejima's eyes darted from the man to her daughter. "You brought a stranger here, Amaka, in this kind of village? Are you trying to invite trouble?" "I couldn't leave him," she said. "Mama, he was dying." Her mother's expression softened just a little. She took a shaky step forward and leaned down beside him. "His face," she murmured. "He's not from here. He's not even like the city boys who come to visit." Amaka said nothing. She watched her mother press the back of her hand to his forehead and sigh. "We need to clean his wounds. If anyone asks, we'll say nothing. Not even your siblings should know." That night, Amaka sat by his side, dabbing gently at his wounds with warm water and mashed pawpaw leaves. She worked in silence, listening to the soft croak of frogs outside and the gentle rise and fall of his chest. For someone who had been unconscious for nearly a day, he looked peaceful, almost too peaceful. Her fingers brushed over his palm, smooth, no calluses, no scars. She looked at his nails, clean, neatly trimmed. No village man had hands like that. She leaned closer, studying the line of his jaw, the shape of his brows, the slight cleft in his chin. Whoever he was, he had lived a life far from poverty, far from suffering. She didn't notice the slight movement until she saw his eyes flicker, then open. She gasped and almost dropped the cloth. His lips moved, dry and cracked. Barely a whisper escaped. "David." Amaka leaned in. "What?" "David," he said again. Then his eyes rolled back and he passed out once more. She sat back, heart racing. David. That was a name, a clue. She reached for a small lantern and studied him again. This time, she wasn't just looking at an injured stranger. She was looking at a puzzle. A man with the hands of a businessman, the face of someone raised on comfort. Yet here he was, broken, bleeding, lying on a mat inside a poor village home. She should report it, but something in her heart said no. That night, she didn't sleep. Every creak of the house made her jump. What if someone found out? What if the villagers accused her of witchcraft, of harboring a criminal? But she'd made her choice. When dawn broke, she told her siblings that a sick traveller had come to see Mama for herbs and was resting in the back room. They nodded, too hungry to care. For the next few days, she bathed his wounds, fed him soft yam pottage, and spoke to him even though he never replied. But one evening, as the sun dipped low and the orange glow filled the room, he opened his eyes and looked directly at her. "Where am I?" he croaked. Amaka stared back. "In a place you were never meant to find," she said softly. But even then, a part of her knew this man would change her life forever. The days bled into one another like strokes of fading watercolor, slow and quiet. David, though still bruised, was now strong enough to stand without staggering. His limp remained, a reminder of whatever he had escaped from, but his steps were steadier. Each morning, Amaka would hand him a small bowl of pap, her eyes avoiding his, her hands always busy with something, peeling cassava, fetching firewood, washing her mother's wrapper. He had stopped asking questions, and she had stopped waiting for answers. At first, he had stayed inside the back room, resting on the raffia mat and listening to the distant sound of goats, the clanging of pots, the laughter of children running through the dusty compound. But by the 5th day, he insisted on stepping outside. "I can't keep hiding like a ghost," he said with a weak smile. Mama Ejima allowed it only after sunset. She didn't trust the villagers. They asked too many questions with their eyes, even when their mouths stayed shut. So David sat on a stool in the evenings, his legs stretched in front of him, watching the fire crackle as Obinna ran around with a torn plastic tire. The boy had taken to David like a goat to shade. He would sit beside him asking endless questions, some silly, some sharp, the kind only a child could ask. "Uncle David," Obinna said one night, mouth full of roasted maize, "do rich people ever fetch water with kegs?" David chuckled, almost choked. "Sometimes, in their dreams." Obinna laughed so hard he nearly fell backward. That laughter did something to David. It shook something loose inside him, something he hadn't known he'd buried. He began helping around the compound slowly at first, gathering firewood, pounding ogbono with one hand, even attempting to sweep. Amaka had scolded him once. "You're making more dust than you're clearing," she said, snatching the broom. But there had been laughter in her voice. And when she laughed, the whole compound felt warmer. At night, David lay on his mat watching her through the open door. She would sit by the doorway, her legs stretched, her siblings curled beside her like little cats. She sang lullabies, not perfect, but tender, her voice soft and soothing. Old folk songs about rivers, loss, love, and longing. Songs she must have heard from her mother, songs that didn't ask for applause, only to be remembered. He stared at her in those moments, at her tired eyes that still held light, her fingers brushing Obinna's hair gently. And he wondered how someone with so little could carry so much grace. Amaka didn't know he was watching, but she felt it. She had started noticing how his gaze lingered a little longer, how his smile stayed even when she wasn't speaking. It made her nervous. Not because she feared him, but because she didn't know how to receive kindness from a man without expecting something sharp to follow. Her mind drifted to the past. She had once loved. His name was Ikenna, the tailor's son. He used to slip her Gary from his mother's shop when she had nothing to eat. He said he'd marry her, said she was gold buried in red dust. But when his uncles visited with bride price talks and they saw Mama Ejima coughing on the mat, saw the cracked walls and the one-roofed home, they left and never returned. Since then, Amaka had learned to carry her own load, with her shoulders squared and her heart closed like a calabash lid. But David was different. He didn't pretend to be strong. He didn't pity her either. When she brought him food, he always said thank you. When she spoke, he listened, not out of obligation, but with interest. And yet, he held back. There were moments he wanted to tell her everything, who he was, where he came from, what he owned. But he couldn't, because when she looked at him, she saw a man, not a wallet, not a title, not a solution, just a man. And for the first time in years, David felt seen. But guilt gnawed at him. Each time he touched the gold wristwatch he still wore, the one thing he hadn't hidden, it reminded him. He wasn't just a stranger, he was David Olanrewaju, CEO of Olan Holdings, a man whose face had graced business magazines, whose signature sealed million naira deals. And here he was, hiding behind plantain trees and firewood. He thought of telling her, but every time she smiled at him, purely, freely, without pretense, he stayed silent. Because what if the truth ruined everything? What if, by telling her who he was, he lost the only person who didn't see him as a prize to be won? So he let the days stretch, helping, laughing, healing, and falling quietly, painfully, in love with the girl who had saved his life without asking for anything in return. The headlines hit the airwaves like wildfire. Billionaire heir David Olanrewaju. Missing foul play suspected. News anchors dissected every angle. Security footage from the airport showed him arriving but not leaving. His private driver hadn't seen him in days. His phone had been found smashed by the roadside near Enugu. Within hours, hashtags began trending. Find David. Olan missing. Where is David? At Olin Holdings in Lagos, board members were on edge. Stock prices trembled. Investors whispered nervously. And in the middle of it all stood Chief Dy1ng, David's father's younger brother, a man with a sharp tongue, colder eyes, and a hunger that had waited patiently for a moment like this. "We must act now," Chief Dy1ng declared at the emergency meeting. "With David gone, someone has to protect the company." "And you think it should be you?" one board member asked cautiously. Dy1ng gave a thin smile. "Until he is found or declared dead, it's the logical choice." Behind closed doors, Dy1ng moved like a shadow, trying to push papers that would grant him full control of the company's assets. But not everyone was fooled. David's personal assistant, Ngozi, knew something didn't sit right. She quietly hired a private investigator, a retired army officer named Osh, known for going off the grid and finding what the police couldn't. Meanwhile, in Umunze village, the sun beat lazily on the corrugated rooftops as Amaka swept the back compound. Her thoughts were tangled, mostly of David. He had started limping less, smiling more. But something in his silence unsettled her. He never spoke of where he came from or who he truly was. And the only item that seemed to connect him to another life was that gold wristwatch, untouched even when he bathed. That afternoon, while folding wrappers near the back room, her fingers brushed something firm beneath the mattress. Curious, she pulled it out. A wallet. Black. Leather. Worn. She opened it slowly, cautiously. Inside was a sleek black card with the name David Olanrewaju, embossed in silver. Her throat went dry. She pulled out the ID card next, an international license with the same name, same face. But the details stunned her. He wasn't just from the city. He wasn't just rich. He was that David, the one people tweeted about, the one she once saw on TV while standing behind a vulcanizer's shop, the man who disappeared. Her hands shook as she stuffed the items back in and waited by the door until he returned from fetching firewood. The moment she saw him, her voice was quiet, but trembling. "David, who are you?" He stopped, blinking. "What do you mean?" She held out the wallet. "You left this under the bed." Silence. For the first time since she'd found him, David didn't know how to form a sentence. He stared at the wallet like it had grown thorns. "You lied to me," Amaka whispered. "All this time, you pretended to be poor. You said nothing. You let me scrub your wounds, share my food, like we were the same." "I never meant to lie," he said finally. "I didn't know who I could trust. When you found me, I was running, escaping something." "From what?" she asked, stepping back. He took a breath. "From people who would rather see me dead than alive. From a world that only saw money, not me." Tears brimmed in her eyes, not from anger but something deeper, betrayal wrapped in confusion. "You should have told me." "I was going to," he said, stepping forward. "But I was afraid that if you knew, you'd stop looking at me the way you do now." "And how do I look at you?" she asked bitterly. "Like I'm just human," he said, voice breaking. "And no one's looked at me like that in a long time." It started with whispers, the kind that slithered between doorways and curled under mats. One person saw David buying painkillers from the local chemist. Another claimed they overheard Obinna call him the man from TV. Within a day, the village air was thick with rumour. "Did you hear? Amaka is hiding a rich man in her compound. A billionaire." A billionaire. In Umunze, wearing torn clothes and pounding yam. Fake clothes. It's all disguise. They said his family is searching everywhere. Maybe he's running from a curse. By the third morning, their compound was no longer quiet. Strangers appeared at the entrance with plastic smiles and long stories. "Ada Amaka, you know I always liked your family. Very respectful children," said Mama Nadi, the same woman who once hissed when Amaka asked for leftover okra. "Do you need extra firewood? I can send my sons," said Eze, who once laughed when Amaka's wrapper tore in the market. They brought gifts, yam, palm oil, even a crate of minerals. Amaka watched them with blank eyes, her lips pressed tightly together. They weren't here for kindness. They were here to gain. David saw it all. From the edge of the window, he watched the shift, the greed in their eyes, the same pattern he knew too well from boardrooms and charity galas. People didn't change, they just adjusted their masks. But nothing prepared them for the arrival of Chief Dy1ng. He came with 3 black SUVs that kicked up dust clouds so thick the goats ran. Dressed in flowing agbada with golden embroidery and sunglasses that reflected everything but revealed nothing, he stepped out like a man who owned the sun. 2 men trailed behind him, briefcases in hand. He didn't bother greeting the elders. He walked straight into Amaka's compound, ignoring the gasps of villagers who had gathered outside. David froze when he saw him. "Uncle?" he said, barely audible. Dy1ng smiled thinly. "Ah, so you're still breathing." Amaka moved between them, her back straight. "You're not welcome here." Dy1ng raised a brow. "You must be the famous Amaka, the poor girl who's captured my nephew's loyalty." "I don't want anything from you." "Good," he said, motioning to the briefcase. One of the men opened it, bundles of fresh Naira notes, stacked neatly. "This is 5 million, Dy1ng said calmly. "Say you never saw him. Deny he was ever here. My people will handle the rest." Amaka stared at the money, her fingers clenched. David stepped forward, his voice firm. "Don't." But Dy1ng kept his eyes on her. "You think he loves you? He'll leave. People like him always leave. Take the money. Save your family." "I'd rather be poor than a liar," she said quietly. "Leave my house." Dy1ng's smile vanished. "You'll regret this." He turned and left, his convoy stirring up another wave of dust. That evening, the village chief arrived. With him came elders and angry whispers. The air was thick with judgment. No one cared about the truth. They only cared that Amaka had hidden something powerful, and they hadn't benefited. "You've brought danger to our land," the chief said sternly. "You must ask your guest to leave, tonight." David opened his mouth, but Amaka raised her hand. "We understand." As the elders left, Mama Ejima coughed violently, falling to her knees. Amaka rushed to her, panic etched into her face. Her mother's chest heaved, her skin burned. The stress had pushed her too far. That night, David sat beside the fire, watching Amaka grind herbs with shaking hands. Her wrapper was soaked in sweat, her eyes hollow. Her lips didn't move, but he could hear her silence, scream. He knelt beside her, touching her arm. "This is my fault," he said. She looked at him, but her eyes held no blame. "You didn't ask me to save you," she whispered. "I chose to, and I'd do it again." David looked away, jaw tight. But in that moment, something inside him broke. Because now he saw the cost, not just kindness, but sacrifice. She had paid for him in stress, in shame, in sickness. And for the first time in his life, David Olanrewaju understood what it meant to be truly loved. The village square hadn't seen a crowd this large since the last New Yam festival. Women in wrappers and faded blouses pressed shoulder to shoulder. Men balanced on okadas and wooden benches. Children clung to their mothers' waists, whispering questions they didn't understand. All eyes were locked on the raised wooden stage where a camera crew, flown in just hours before, set up tripods and microphones. Lagos reporters adjusted their earpieces. Bright lights flashed. And standing in the middle of it all, dust coating the hem of his navy kaftan, was David Olanrewaju. He looked nothing like the man who had once staggered into Umunze forest, bloody and broken. He stood tall now, face calm, voice steady. The gold wristwatch gleamed under the afternoon sun, no longer hidden. "Good afternoon, Nigeria," he began, his voice echoing through the village loudspeakers. "My name is David Ayatunde Olanrewaju. I am alive, and I am speaking to you today from the very place that gave me a second chance." Gasps swept through the crowd. Some villagers looked around in shock, unsure whether to cheer or remain frozen. Others clutched their chests as if realizing for the first time that the rumors had been true all along. "I went missing 3 weeks ago," David continued, eyes scanning the faces. "People assumed I had been kidnapped or killed. But the truth is, I was saved." He turned slowly to the side. "By a woman. A woman whose name you all know. A woman many of you mocked, overlooked, and spoke ill of." Amaka stood at the edge of the crowd, trying to disappear into it. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. She wasn't ready for this. She didn't want the attention. She just wanted her mother to breathe easier, her siblings to eat well, her life to go back to the quiet chaos she understood. But David pointed. "Amaka." The crowd turned. "She found me in the forest, carried me, hid me, fed me. She asked for nothing. Not once did she see me as anything more than a man who needed help." The villagers shifted awkwardly. Some lowered their heads. Mama Neddy coughed and stepped behind her neighbor. David's voice grew firmer. "And while I was here healing, my uncle, Chief Dy1ng, attempted to seize control of my company. He claimed I was dead. He tried to bribe the very person who saved me just to keep me hidden. That ends today." He turned to the cameras. "I am pressing charges against him and all who collaborated. The law will find them." A pause. A breath. "And to this village. Umunze, I owe a debt." There was a murmur of surprise. "I will fund a clinic here, build a proper school, and create a job scheme for women and youth. But," he raised a hand, "only if Amaka agrees to leave with me." The hush that followed was louder than any scream. David turned, searching the crowd. "Amaka, I don't want to repay you with money. I want to walk this life with you, but I won't force you." Amaka felt the weight of every eye. The air thickened. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. She stepped forward, one trembling foot at a time, until she was standing just before the stage. Her wrapper clung to her skin. Her heart thundered in her chest. And when she looked up at David, she didn't see power or fame. She saw the man who smiled at Obina's jokes, the man who limped while fetching firewood, the man who listened, really listened, when she sang to her siblings by moonlight. But still, doubt lingered. Was this love or gratitude dressed as affection? She lowered her gaze. "Why me?" David came down from the platform, stepping barefoot into the red earth beside her. "Because you saw me when I was nothing, and you loved me anyway." Tears welled in her eyes, but she held them in. Later that evening, in the silence of their compound, Mama Ejima rested against the wall, her voice weak but full of warmth. "My daughter," she whispered, reaching for Amaka's hand. "Sometimes love finds us where we are too humble to look." Amaka sank beside her mother, her heart full of questions. But somewhere deep inside, a tiny light flickered. Not the kind that comes from recognition or riches, but the kind that comes from being truly seen. And this time, she wasn't sure whether to run from it or fall into it. The morning Amaka left Umunza, the entire village gathered to watch. Some came out of curiosity, others came out of guilt, and a few, very few, came out of pride. She stood quietly beside David, her wrapper replaced by a soft blue Ankara gown. Her hair was braided neatly, face glowing in the morning sun. But it wasn't the clothes or the ride that changed her. It was the knowing that she had made her choice. Not for money, not for praise, but for love, and for the life she had always dreamed of but never dared to name. David stood beside her, his arm close but not forceful, waiting. When she looked up at him, she gave a small nod. "Yes, I'll go with you." His breath caught just slightly, and the smile that bloomed on his face was the kind that could light up a city. Before they left, David kept one more promise. A week after the press conference, a sleek ambulance rolled into Umunse and carried Mama Ejima, Obina, and Adaeze to a private hospital in Enugu. For the first time in years, they would be treated with dignity. No queues, no expired medicine, no apologies for not affording care. As she hugged her mother goodbye at the hospital gate, Mama Ejima pressed a note into Amaka's hand. "In case your heart forgets," she whispered. Amaka didn't open it then. She kept it in her bag close to her chest. By the time the rains returned to Umunze, the red earth outside the village chief's house had already been dug and leveled. Construction began swiftly. Cement blocks, scaffolding, new workers in clean boots. The villagers watched in stunned silence as the foundation of a free clinic was laid, and every week fresh cartons of medical supplies arrived, with no bill attached. He named it the Ejima Care Centre. Back in Abuja, things were different. Amaka had never seen a place so clean, so vast. David's mansion sat on a quiet hill surrounded by greenery and the gentle hush of wealth that didn't need to shout. But he didn't throw her into it. He gave her time, a room of her own, lessons with a private tutor, dresses she could choose herself. And most importantly, respect. One afternoon, as the harmattan breeze kissed the windows, David found her in the garden. She was barefoot, walking between rows of hibiscus and sunflowers, her fingers trailing along the petals. Her face was calm. He stood beside her in silence, letting her speak first. "Do you know," she said softly, "I used to think gardens were only for rich people. Now I understand. They're for people who survived storms." David reached for her hand. "And you did." She turned to him then, eyes soft, voice steady. "We did." As they walked side by side through the garden, the camera could have captured a fairy tale ending. But this wasn't a fairy tale. It was a truth. A story of a broken man who had run into a forest trying to disappear, and a poor girl who found him, healed him, and reminded him what it meant to be human again. Amaka wasn't just the village girl anymore. She was the woman who had saved a billionaire, not with money, but with compassion. And as she stepped forward into this new beginning, she knew one thing for sure: she had changed his world. But in saving him, she had also saved herself. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want more powerful emotional dramas like this, don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything.